This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
It's great to have as our guest today Dr. Karen Kwiatkowski. Karen was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, very prolific writer. Take a look at her archive at lewrockwell.com. She teaches at the University of Maryland and further institutions of higher learning. And she's also been in any number of documentaries giving the correct position on American foreign policy and who's responsible for the bad turns things have taken. But Karen, I think of you as like the key enemy of the neocons. I mean, when you were still in the Pentagon, you saw what was going on in terms of the promotion of war and the promotion of all the terrible policies, foreign policies of the Bush administration. Tell us about that.
Actually, when I first started working in the Pentagon, I didn't know what neoconservative was. I'd never even heard of it. I thought that there was just conservative and liberal, and I was a conservative, so I thought. But some very strange things. I mean, the pro-war thing that you mentioned, I mean, this pro-war attitude, so pro-war, so determined to go forth in battle that they would make up things. And this is what really offended me as a military person. To see facts being twisted, to see intelligence being ignored, misused, made up in many cases. So I got to see that. So what is that? Is that coming from the conservative side? Because I thought I was a conservative, and I was certainly, had been a Republican for a long time before I was a libertarian. So I thought, well, this is alien. Where is this coming from? And so I started researching it and reading some on Lew Rockwell and other places, and came to discover neoconservatism, which is not conservatism at all. And pro-war, I think, is a good way to describe it, because I don't think they really stand for much else. Of course, war being the health of the state, these people are very much statists. But, shocking stuff. And they had found their home in the Republican Party. And that, I think, was, in addition to being offended by the misuse of intelligence as a military professional, I was also offended as a former Republican that the Republican Party would be the home for these folks.
And, of course, these people, I always think of them as bloodthirsty non-combatants. These were all civilians. These were not people in uniform, and they weren't themselves going out to war. They were sending other people to war.
That's exactly right. And that kind of stands out to you also because, in the military or any place, in companies and business, you respect experience, and that respect is not something that's on people's uniforms. It's something that's earned. So where did these folks get their experience in war? Well, none. Yet they were advocating it. And where did they get their experience in foreign policy and strategy? Well, none. And yet they were the so-called experts. And of course, in this particular Bush administration, Cheney administration, whatever you want to call it, I mean, these people are clustered, very much came to power, because under Clinton, the same names were still advocating for war, but for the most part were not in the Clinton administration. They were the outsiders, which, of course, as a former conservative, the outsiders are good, and that kind of gave them, in my mind, I think, if not credibility, at least I didn't have any cause for alarm. But once the Bush administration is in power, these folks are empowered. Not righteously so, not justifiably so, but certainly empowered. And, we've got, 8 years of disaster to stand witness to what happens when you empower people like this.
Because we use the terms neoconservative and neocon, but I might just pause to define them for the listeners. A neoconservative is somebody, as Karen said, who's a statist. They call themselves, in fact, big government conservatives under other circumstances. And, in fact, what they've promoted is the warfare state, but they also promote the police state. They promote executive power. These are the people who keep talking about the unitary executive and the idea that, as a matter of fact, they've pretty much won this intellectual war, that all power should be in the executive, that the president should be able to declare war on his own, should be able to send American troops any place entirely on his own, doesn't need any permission of Congress, should be able to spend money on his own, should be able to jail his opponents, foreign or domestic, torture them. So it's the people who glory in these kinds of policies, and they're especially concerned with the Middle East and in having America dominate the Middle East. And they've done a good job of taking power, as you say, in the Bush administration, and they've had a lot of their policies come to fruition, if that's the word, with the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. And yet they also seem to be, in some sense, to me, to be crazy. Now, I hate to say anything good about the sort of realist foreign policy people, the people we might think of as the Rockefeller Republicans of the past, because certainly they promoted a rotten welfare state, rotten warfare state, all kinds of terrible bailouts of the sort we're now seeing proposed on Wall Street. But they didn't seem to have a crazy gene. There's something about the neoconservatives. Do you think I'm right in thinking that they seem to believe some of their own propaganda? I mean, they actually seem to think that here as an alien force, a bunch of illegal aliens, we might say, going into Iraq, people of a different religion, a different culture, different ethnicity, different history, different language, and then are going to tell everybody what to do and how to live our way. They thought that people would actually greet them with flower petals. That was a phrase that was actually used. Or was this all just lies? They are very competent liars. Was this another lie, or did they sometimes even believe it?
Well, I'm always torn between, do they really believe their own rhetoric, or are they pure 100% criminal scoundrels, purposely putting forth things, expecting maybe another set of results, which is what they really want, but certainly can't sell. So, telling the pretty stories, the candy, all these good things. I don't know. I think, those who study history, and they're among the neocons. I mean, Gingrich comes to mind, the Kagan brothers. These guys study history. Who's the guy that always writes for National Review?
Victor David Hanson.
Yeah.
The belligerent raisin farmer,
yeah,
as I think
three names like a serial killer. But he studies history, and yet I think is pretty much an on-board neoconservative. So, are they naive? Are they not that bright? I think maybe part of it is that they're not that bright. Those that do believe it, but I think there is an aspect to some of these guys where they absolutely could care less about the stated results. They feel no inconsistency when it doesn't come out the way they say, because they never really believed it. And that's really, I'm leaning towards that they don't really believe their own rhetoric, but they have an ulterior, an alternative and an ulterior motive, in particular to the Middle East. Because if you look at the neoconservatives, they seem obsessed with the Middle East. I mean, okay, every once in a while they complain about China. They'd like to see Russia, emerge as another combatant against us, to somehow justify our warfare state. But really, they're obsessed with the Middle East, and a good part of that is their view of their role in supporting Israel. I just have to think that that's a key part of it, and this includes obviously the much larger body of Christian neoconservatives who see Israel as central, and the United States is somehow integral to the survival and enhancement of the state of Israel. So this confusion of historical, religious, and political values all in one. And they don't really care if the Iraqis throw candy or not. What they care about is that Iraqis die, or at least the ones that are fighting us die. They're not interested in a good government for Afghanistan. I think what they're interested in is that Afghans submit. And that's all that's really required. If they don't throw candy, they can die. They can be shot with drones. We can blow up their houses. They can blow up their own, facilities. They can have civil war. These things don't cost the neoconservatives in America anything, and quite frankly, they don't cost the neoconservatives that happen to be in Israel much either politically. So I think they're really kind of they don't really believe their own rhetoric, but they don't care. They don't care that it's inconsistent. They're very Machiavellian in that way, but that's an insult to Machiavelli. But it's that's kind of how I see most of them. And I think there are some that truly can paint a very rosy picture of what the world would be with a benevolent caretaker United States of the world. They can paint this picture, but I think most of them really don't believe it. That they have, and the other weird thing is if you look. They make a lot of money, a lot of these guys. they make money on their influence of politics, and that kind of defeats, that kind of says that they're not really idealists, they're not really true believers, they're just kind of in it for themselves. They fooled a lot of people, and I think that's what the real shame is.
Well, certainly on your side of this argument is what Leo Strauss had to say. Leo Strauss was, in some sense, the godfather of neoconservatism, a brilliant classicist and a political thinker at the University of Chicago, who advocated the noble lie, that any lie, he was talking about pretending to be religious in that particular instance. But what he really meant was that any lie that would justify the rule of the philosophers, and to make sure that the king would always listen to the philosophers, and by the philosophers he meant the neoconservatives, that was a great thing, and that it was indeed noble to lie in that cause. So that's certainly the neocons are happy to lie. I think that they seem to have an overweening belief in the power of the gun. I mean, they really think that put a gun to somebody's head and they can bring anything about, but you can't actually bring anything about through the power of the gun. There is resistance, and there's economic law and all other kinds of things that resist the power of the state, and they certainly have total faith and belief in the power of the state to enrich them. I mean, you mentioned that question. Look at Richard Pearl.
Oh, yeah.
Made many, many millions of dollars as a military contractor involved in the wars that he promoted. So is that a coincidence? Obviously not.
No, and also, they don't socialize much, either personally or intellectually, outside of their, other neoconservatives, like-minded people who are enriching themselves. I mean, if all you ever hang around with is, not that Halliburton is an example of neoconservatism, but if all you ever hang around with is people that work with Halliburton or work for that company at a certain level or in a certain division, your worldview is going to be kind of closed, and you're going to say things that other people around you are going to say, yeah, that sounds right to me. And I think that's one of the things that the neoconservatives don't get out much. And maybe that's a good thing, but actually when they do get out, when people, and we've, a good many people, in part thanks to your site and others, but a good many people now understand what neoconservatism is. They see it as separate from traditional conservatism. They identify it separately from a political party. Well, they used to not. And just the very fact that we can talk about these ideas, they don't stand on their own very well, I guess is what I'm saying. So to understand the neoconservatives in part is to understand a group of people who don't get out much. And they're really, they adhere to ideas that look good and that do enrich them and in some cases empower them politically. But they really aren't ideas that are substantial. They're not competitive in the world of ideas, which is a good thing. And I think that is the seeds of their own defeat, certainly. And I think we're seeing that defeat now is when we start to actually talk about what they stand for, because what you see is hypocrisy. You see stupidity. You see an ahistorical nature to what it is that they say and believe and advocate. So, it doesn't stand on its own very well, which is a good thing.
Karen, it's thanks to people like you that we've turned the word neoconservative into a pejorative. So even though they name themselves that, Irving Kristol, Bill Kristol's dad, another godfather of neoconservatism, wrote any number of books about neoconservatism using that word. Now, of course, they claim that it's a slur.
Sure.
And so you can't identify them. But it's been very, very useful to identify them. It's useful to discuss their ideas. And, of course, as you say, they're the most uncompelling, except for the people who are getting rich off it and getting rich off sending a bunch of 18-year-olds to die for these ideas and, of course, to kill a lot of innocent people in the process. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we have conservatives, which some people like them and some people don't like them, but certainly we don't call them cons. But with neocons, we can call them neocons. That's exactly what they are, and it is a pejorative, and it should be. And that's a great thing. And that's, I think you mentioned it, Lew, in your article today about the power of ideas, and it brought to mind that phrase from V for Vendetta, where he talks at the end about ideas being bulletproof. And they certainly are, and maybe we can look at the history, the modern history of neoconservatism as to show that their ideas don't hold water, that there's so many improved ways of perceiving the world and doing things that they're not competitive. Neoconservatism is simply not competitive, and that's a great thing.
Well, they're living a lie, and thanks to truth-tellers like you, maybe we have a chance against them. Dr. Karen Kwiatkowski, thanks so much for coming on the show. Take a look at her archive at lewrockwell.com. She's a very important voice.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show, produced by lewrockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast or on the website, email advertise@lewrockwell.com. And thanks for listening.